From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. And we're delighted that as our guest today, we have a very accomplished lady, Kristina Rasmussen, who has done many things in her young life. In May 2006, she completed her master's degree in political management at George Washington University, where she was named a Bryce Harlow Foundation Scholar. Some of you may recall Bryce Harlow, an outstanding man, a great man, who I was privileged to call a friend during the years in which I served in the federal government. She is a summa cum laude graduate of Randolph-Macon Women's College in Lynchburg, Virginia, where she got a BA in political science. She hails from the state of Minnesota. She has been a research fellow for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, an entity with whose policies I often find myself in disagreement. She used to serve, not your fault, she used to serve with Congresswoman Katherine Harris of Florida. She was also involved with the National Federation of Independent Business. She writes an op-ed piece about once every 3 weeks, and they've been featured in most of the major publications in this country: Forbes, National Review, online, Investors Business Daily, The Hill, the Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, etc. She's currently the Director of Government Affairs for the National Taxpayers Union, an outstanding organization which has done great work on taxes. Now, in recent weeks, we've heard a lot about the stimulus package. And when I first heard George Bush discussing it, I said, boy, that's familiar. It reminds me of something that George McGovern talked about in 1972. When McGovern ran for president in 72, he said, we're going to give everybody $1,000. Well, George Bush is trumping that. He's giving more to some people, although actually the more you earn, the less you get back from the government. And I guess we can say that on this issue, at least, George Bush has trumped George McGovern, and he's a McGovernite. What is going on here?
Well, Congress is looking at a stimulus package based on conversations with the president. And basically, they're preparing to spend about $150 billion to give Americans tax rebate checks and to...
Where's that money going to come from?
Well, since Congress is spending more than it's bringing in right now, we're borrowing.
We're going to be taxing people so that we can give back some of the money to some of the people some of the time.
Exactly. What we're doing is taking money that the Treasury has already taxed from some Americans and some businesses and giving it to other Americans. And you're right, it is skewed towards low-income folks. If you make more
Even if they haven't paid taxes.
You have to have earned at least $3,000 in 2007, but because of the various tax credits and deductions, many of those folks will have no effective burden of the federal income tax.
And of course, if people...
And they will get a check.
If people are released from the tax rolls, it means they have zero stake in restraining federal spending.
You're absolutely
because
right.
it's all something for nothing.
Exactly. And if you're making over $150,000 a year, you will not be a recipient of one of these checks, which is interesting because 60% of the federal income tax burden is paid by folks who make over $150,000. So we're giving tax rebates out, but not necessarily to everyone who pays the taxes.
Is there any significant, or has there been any significant opposition to this so-called stimulus package, otherwise known as a rob the bank giveaway? Who's opposing it?
You know, a few brave souls in the House of Representatives did vote against it. Some of them in the 30s, some of them because they didn't think it spent enough. A group of coalition of groups, came out with a letter in January of 2008 saying we have concerns with this, and it was signed by many of the major organizations, including my own, the National Taxpayers Union. However, we clearly didn't convince enough folks because more than 300 representatives did vote in favor of the package.
It's always easy to give away somebody else's money.
It is. A few economists have come out against this. Walter Williams, for example, saying, slow down, you can't wave a magic wand, Congress, and make the economy all better. That's just not how it works. What you can do is have a lasting tax policy that encourages businesses to invest and rewards individuals for their hard work. but taking money that's already been taxed out and giving it to other folks isn't going to create the long-term growth that we need.
Now, what, in an ideal world, what would our tax system look like if the National Taxpayers Union had its way?
There are a few general proposals that we do support. One of them is a fair tax. I'm sure you've heard about it. As a general reform proposal...
Let me ask you a question. People argue about whether the fair tax would be 30% or 23%. Can you imagine Detroit selling as many cars if people had to pay even a 23% tax on the purchase of a new car?
I think if that tax was visible up front, that's just more incentive for voters to urge their congressmen to keep it low. Right now, the taxes we pay are sprinkled throughout their lives. A lot of them we don't see. And having visibility on taxes is one of the most important things on keeping that overall burden low.
I remember Ronald Reagan said that his feet are in concrete when it comes to the withholding tax. He's absolutely against it. And then a withholding tax bill came to him, and he brought out a block of concrete and broke it and signed the bill, unfortunately. I prefer the approach taken by Governor Sanford of South Carolina, who walked into the legislature with a pig under each arm, protesting the pork policies of that legislature. He's probably as good a governor as there is in the United States of America.
He's definitely one of the better ones. Absolutely, I agree. But in addition to the fair tax, we also support flat tax proposals. Arlen Specter has a plan that you could file your annual taxes on a postcard and send it into the IRS. Yeah. So we basically look for...
How much did you make? Send it in.
Yeah, 100%. That's tax simplicity for you. But we're looking for a tax code that rewards economic activity, encourages growth, and is simple to understand.
Now, I know that your organization is very responsible, and you recognize the need to cut spending.
Absolutely.
As well as taxes. What spending would you cut?
Can I go with departments, or do you want me to pick programs?
Well, whatever you're most comfortable doing.
A great place to start are programs that are ineffective or duplicative. And there is a fantastic website that's put together by the Bush administration called expectmore.gov. Now, I'm of the opinion that we should be expecting less from government. But what this website does is it's gone through every single federal program and rated their performance. Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? Never mind if government is supposed to be doing them in the first place.
That's the key question.
But are they effective for what we're spending? There's 151 programs that have been termed not performing, either because they can't show results, they're ineffective, or they're just simply not needed because someone else is doing the job. 151 programs there, cut $12 billion to $18 billion savings right there.
Larry McDonald used to say that the first question you should ask is whether it's constitutional. And by that standard, instead of having a $3 trillion plus budget, it would be closer to about $600 billion, and most of it would be for defense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How did you develop your personal political philosophy, which is on the conservative side?
You know, my parents, I had a piggy bank growing up, and my parents rewarded me whenever I saved money instead of spending it. For example, instead of buying a CD or something like that, if I kept it in the bank, they'd match my contribution to that piggy bank. And then I started having a job, and I realized just how much the government was taking out of my paycheck. I was earning the minimum wage at a high school job, and I was furious. This is my money. I've worked hard for it. And it really is just a personal experience with my own finances that led me to appreciate economic policy that rewards
Were your parents politically interested or active or involved?
Not really. Not particularly.
Have you been?
I am an issues person. I get more excited about ideas as opposed to politicians.
So when you were in Randolph-Macon, you were not active in any campaigns?
No, not particularly. No, although the city of Lynchburg is fairly one-party dominated, so because there isn't that much of a competition, the campaigns aren't too active in that area.
Another area in which you've developed some expertise is federal agriculture programs.
Absolutely.
And, of course, most of what we're doing there is unconstitutional, the subsidies. Everybody talks about cutting them, but because of the significance of the farm-state vote, it's seldom done. Talk to us about that.
Well, let me preface my remarks by saying that I am the proud granddaughter of 2 farmers from central Minnesota, and I don't always agree with my grandparents on agricultural policy because the policies we have today really are remnants from the New Deal, 1920s. We're in a new The 2008 commodity prices at our all-time high. This is the perfect time to do away with some of those wasteful subsidies. Unfortunately, Congress isn't doing that. Both the House and the Senate passed farm bills in 2007 that increased spending. It's about $286 billion on programs that very often funnel money towards agribusiness. It's not even the family farmer who's really getting the checks.
Why do you think George Bush didn't veto that? He's talking now about vetoing earmarks.
Absolutely.
But did he just discover his veto pen, or what was the deal?
I think there were some political considerations in 2002 when the last farm bill was that unfortunately got in the way of good policy decisions. But you're right, the farm vote is very important. The farm bill lobby is very strong. When you compare their clout to taxpayer groups, it's definitely lopsided.
We're going to have to take a break. When we come back, there are many more economic issues in which you are expert, and I'm going to try to pick your brain on those.
Sounds
Thank you.
good.
Stay with us. And our guest is Kristina Rasmussen of the National Taxpayers Union. The Conservative Caucus is working to raise up a new generation of leaders who understand the principles of the Founding Fathers as set forth in the Constitution of the United States. In Article 1, Section 8, it says, Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and to fix the standard of weights and measures. Congress has abdicated that duty, that responsibility, to the Federal Reserve, which now, by inflating the money supply on a continuing basis, each day taxes us more than Congress does by diminishing the value of our savings and our earnings. The Conservative Caucus, almost alone among national conservative organizations, is working to restore constitutional government, whether the issue is money or something else.
www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
More than the entire population of Cincinnati. More than all the men and women in the Marine Corps. More than 4 times the number of unemployed auto workers. Since 1980, over 500,000 Americans who make clothing and home fashions have lost their jobs because we don't realize the impact of buying imported goods. So if you think looking for the Made in the USA label doesn't matter,
Next.
it matters.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with our guest, Kristina Rasmussen, who is a key official with the National Taxpayers Union. Talk to us about transparency.
This is the next big thing, really, in the taxpayer movement. We all send in our taxes to our state, local, federal governments, but we don't really see where it goes. We hear about it, but we really can't get into the nitty-gritty details because that information isn't available, or you have to file a Freedom of Information request. So 2 years ago, 2 senators, a Democrat and Republican, teamed together to pass a bill on the federal level that would create a website.
Who were the two?
Senator Tom Coburn and Senator Barack Obama.
I recall that.
And they created a bill that would establish a website listing all federal grants and contracts, and there's a lot of them, worth over $25,000. There was some pushback, of course, especially from appropriators who don't want this information made available to the light of day. But we passed the bill, and in December 2007, a new website went live. It's called usaspending.gov, and this is where you can go and Google your government. Type in a keyword, find out how much the federal government is spending on grants and contracts in these areas, who's getting the money, why are they using it. This is key information that taxpayers should have at their fingertips.
Let me tell you a story from personal experience. When I headed the U.S. Office of Economic Opportunity, there were 2,000 people who theoretically reported to me at headquarters and in the regional offices, but there were 500,000 people who worked for 10,000, they now call them NGOs, private nonprofit corporations that were, in almost every case, funded entirely by the American taxpayer. And while the the grants from the agency were subject to the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. It stopped there. The FOIA did not extend to cover the ways in which the grantees were spending the money. And most of the harm was done behind closed doors, and the American people had no idea. And I've tried repeatedly to try to get the FOIA extended to cover the activities of federally funded grantees. I tried on many occasions to get Orrin Hatch, who had some particular responsibilities in that area, to do it. He was unwilling to do it. Others were unwilling. But you might put that on your list, because that's where the real harm is done. In the case of the Great Society programs, we had a budget when I was there of about $3 billion, but the programs today are hundreds of billions, or scores of billions. You had federal dollars being used by these grantees in litigation, organizing so-called law reform. They had paid lobbyists in almost every state legislature.
Asking for more taxpayer money.
Exactly. And they engaged in community education, so-called, which was to promote the Saul Alinsky Marxist agenda. You know, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are devotees of Saul Alinsky, who was really the architect of the Great Society. He wrote 2 books, Rules for Radicals and Reveille for Radicals, about how government money could be used to transform American culture and society. They also used these recipients, the money to promote group representation. They would organize groups. Under these programs, which I tried to close down, something like 500 chapters of the National Welfare Rights Organization were created with taxpayer money all over America. Reform of the I recall distinctly the work that Coburn and Obama did. That was a tremendous step forward, but we need to expand the coverage of the FOIA.
You're absolutely right, and part of the work that we've done to expand this is take it to the states. Yep. So we worked with the American Legislative Exchange Council to draft model legislation.
Which deals with state legislators from all over the country.
Exactly. To draft up model legislation that state legislators could take back to their state capitals and introduce. And I'm very proud and happy to say that in 2007, 9 states acted to create some sort of transparency website. Missouri, the database created by Missouri Governor Matt Blunt, is fantastic. You type in a keyword, you'll be amazed the type of spending you can find there.
He's more conservative than his daddy. And
not running for re-election, I heard.
I was just going to say it's a shame that he's pulling out of politics. Not a shame for his family, but a shame for the body politic.
So we have 9 states that have these databases already. Some states already have piecemeal websites, but if they're for grants or contractors, they're geared towards the people asking for the money. So they're not taxpayer friendly. But this year, in 2008, we have 7 state legislators who've already introduced bills. They're moving forward in the committee process. It's easy to work on a bipartisan basis. And it's fantastic because we're opening up spending information to taxpayers.
Now, do you track what's in Commerce Business Daily, for example? Commerce Business Daily is a government publication that provides information with some specificity about government grants and contracts. Mm-hmm. Very useful. When our staff was a little bit bigger, we used to cover that every day. And there was a time when we trained people in congressional districts to use Commerce Business Daily to see what was happening with their money. And, of course, in addition, of course, to the Congressional Record, you've got the Federal Register, which is a goldmine of information, and it gets bigger all the time.
74,000 pages last year. Can you believe that?
You know, ignorance of the law is a pretty darn good excuse today because it's virtually impossible.
And pages. Absolutely.
And then another good source for information is the weekly compilation of presidential documents. Mm-hmm. Every now and then you'll find a nugget in there that tells you a lot about what's going on. So in the states where you've had success in transparency, who provides the leadership? Is it the governor? Is it a member of the legislature?
It varies, actually. Yeah. For example, Nebraska's treasurer took the initiative. Missouri's governor took the initiative. But a state like Minnesota that passed their database, it was a pair of legislators, a Republican and a Democrat in either house. So it really depends. But the key lesson there is that there are multiple paths to get these websites created. It doesn't have to be a bill. It doesn't have to be an executive order. Key thing is let's just get them made.
Now, let's go back to the fair tax. The good news is that if there were the fair tax proposal implemented, theoretically, you'd be rid of taxes on Social Security, Medicare, the death tax, et cetera, et cetera. But who would collect the sales taxes, and how would the collection process be monitored? Would it be entirely function delegated to the states, or would there be federal bureaucrats doing it? How would it happen?
Well, that's another question. In the prebates that are often paired with the fair tax, who's going to be the person or the agency issuing those? So the fair tax likes to talk about how it would get rid of the IRS.
Theoretically takes care of the
cost of the sales tax up to the poverty limit. So it's not a regressive tax.
The regressive nature of it, and supposedly you give people back money before they spend it.
Exactly. So there would need to be some sort of system set up for that.
But doesn't the Constitution guarantee equal protection of the law? Isn't it outrageous that people of different backgrounds, of different who have a different economic status, are treated differently by the government?
It's amazing to see how different that can be as well. You think everyone's a taxpayer, we should all have similar burdens. That's not true. A large chunk of the American public...
And of course there should not be varying rates of tax depending on your level of income or what you do for a living or whatever it may be.
I think that if every taxpayer has to pay some sort of thing into the government, they have a stake in it, even if it's $5. But if all of a sudden they have no effective tax burden, they don't care how much is spent because they know they're on the recipient side.
My approach to taxation is what the Bible prescribes, and that is an equal tax, a head tax. Everyone, regardless of economic status, pays exactly the same amount, but it's voluntary. If they want to vote, if they want to hold office, they pay the tax. If they don't care about voting or holding office, they don't have to pay a bloody thing. And in that way, you have really equality of opportunity, equality of result, and you have a truly accountable system of government. So no graduation, no rate of taxation depending on your level of income. Even the 10% flat tax discriminates on the basis of levels of income. 10% of $1 million a year is a lot different than 10% of $1,000 a year. So my view is the biblical approach, which calls for the equal head tax if you want to be a decision maker in the gates, is the way to go. I think we should, that's one area where I think theonomy, not theocracy, which is the rule of the church, but theonomy, the rule of God's law, applies appropriately.
You mentioned voluntary. President Bush, in his State of the Union speech, did mention that the IRS accepts checks and money orders.
I saw
so
that.
If anyone thinks that we should be taxed more, feel free to send that check in. And that's actually one of the things we've been working on the states, is to create Tax Me More funds. If people would like to send in their voluntary contribution, if they feel like they're not paying enough, go ahead and send your check in.
Well, I think Steve Forbes had the right idea when he proposed a tax reform proposal. He said you can either pay it the old way or you can pay less under the tax reform proposal that I'm putting forward. And if people want to pay more, that's a bad decision on their part. Before we go to a break, let me just give our audience a heads up that when we come back, Kristina is going to let us know how you can get on her mailing list, learn more about what she's doing, and have some last words of guidance for us. Kristina, stay with us, and you stay with us too. We'll be right back. The very first clause in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, immediately following the preamble, asserts that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All legislative powers, that means you cannot give other entities the power to legislate, not the United Nations or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or the federal judiciary or regulatory agencies or federally funded private organizations. If you're going to stick to the Constitution, only the Congress can make policy, and the Conservative Caucus works to assure that Congress will more nearly conform to the Constitution.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
More than the entire population of Cincinnati, more than all the men and women in the Marine Corps, More than 4 times the number of unemployed auto workers. Since 1980, over 500,000 Americans who make clothing and home fashions have lost their jobs because we don't realize the impact of buying imported goods. So if you think looking for the Made in the USA label doesn't matter,
next,
it matters.
Welcome back. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, I hope you'll check out the website of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. It's www.conservativeusa.org. And if you'd like to receive some of our publications, please fax us your name and address at 703-281-4108 or drop us a note at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. Kristina Rasmussen, how can people get in touch with you?
They can visit our website at www.ntu.org. That's for National Taxpayers Union.
Okay. In the time remaining, brag a little bit about your foundation program.
We have a new grant program, actually, that's geared towards taxpayer activists at the state and local level. So if you have listeners or viewers who are interested in starting up a taxpayer group of their very own at the state and local level, I encourage them to visit ntu.org.
You'll help them.
We have an application that they can fill out, and we already provide information on how to set up a group, how to incorporate, how do you find members, how do you pick your issues. But we're also providing some startup seed funds that they can use.
How much money?
We have a total fund available of $50,000, but that will be divided among the applicants.
What's the most you could give to one applicant?
You know, we haven't made our grant awards yet, so you can tell us how much you think that you are deserving of, and then we'll factor that into our fund.
So it's a merit-based evaluation.
Absolutely, and our application asks a lot of questions because we're fiscally responsible.
Good for you.
We want to hear about your good ideas and your detailed ideas to make sure that the money will be put to good use.
Kristina, we appreciate your taking the time to be with us, and we wish you well in your efforts to cut federal spending and federal taxes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on Conservative Roundtable.